Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the talk series at Serendipity Arts Festival. As many of you are aware, SAF is one of South Asia's largest multidisciplinary festivals that brings together performative, visual, and culinary practices from India and beyond. We are very pleased to be partnering with NCPA's Onstage magazine, who will be presenting today's discussion titled The Shrinking Space for Writing on the Performing Arts. This session addresses the declining focus on specialized writing and critique in the performing and visual arts in India and explores the challenges and opportunities in arts writing and discuss how editorial engagement can reshape the narrative. Moderating this session is Snigdha Hassan, editor of Onstage, the arts magazine of the National Centre for the Performing Arts, NCPA, Mumbai. With over 15 years of experience in cultural journalism and teaching, Snigdha brings a wealth of insight to this conversation. Joining her is Naresh Fernandez, editor of Scroll.in and author of acclaimed books like City Adrift and Taj Mahal Foxtrot. Naresh has a rich history in cultural journalism and was the founder editor of Time Out India, a leading culture magazine. Also on the panel is Suvanshu Khurana, senior editor at the Indian Express with a background in journalism and music. Suvanshu is known for her insightful profiles of legendary artists like Kishori Amonkar and Ravi Shankar, and she is the recipient of the Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism. Over to you, Snigdha.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. The wonderful panelists with me here today, and all of you in this beautiful venue at the Serendipity Arts Festival. I think we're all here because this topic means something to us. But before we begin, I'd like to take a few minutes to read a few words from tributes that have been pouring in honor of the memory of the maestro, of the great maestro, Zakir Hussain. And it's one of those rare occasions where news from the world of music has made it to the front page, above the fold. So here's from the article, A Beat Goes Missing, Suvanshu Khurana, The Indian Express. It isn't often that a percussionist finds life in the intricacies of punctuation. Its pauses mostly remain the preserve of literature. Tabla virtuoso, Ustad Zakir Hussain, whose tenacity went beyond the cadence, tone, tempo, and inflection, whose eloquence in putting apostrophes, ellipses, and exclamations in the mathematically labyrinthine stories lifted the tabla, the modest paired drum set, and hoisted it as India's flag for over half a century, passed away in San Francisco on Sunday. I move to the last paragraph. In the last couple of decades, Hussain had more shows and collaborative projects lined up. His next year was already booked out as the news came in. But in all of the tizzy of his busy touring life, when the sound of the tabla had become more of a pleasure-seeking exercise than just showing off the technical prowess, where new idioms were being formed and where the noble world of caution was being thrown to the wind, all that remained was a haze, original, thorough, and the kind that is remembered for a lifetime. I move to another article, Zakir Hussain, one of the most influential global musical voices of his generation, a tribute from a long-time friend to the tabla maestro, Gregory Booth, for Scroll. As his career progressed, Zakir Bhai expanded his love for other musicians to his juniors in India and in musical worlds far removed from his own. At one concert in Auckland in New Zealand, featuring his masters of percussion colleagues, he introduced an item with local Pacific Island drummers as a collaboration between us and us, teaching his colleagues, collaborators, and audience an important lesson about openness and inclusivity. As he moved from being a young leader to being the senior voice of Indian classical music, Zakir Hussain continued to work tirelessly to provide performance and recording opportunities to young musicians that were made possible by his generosity and his reputation. Everyone who encountered him for 5 minutes or for 50 years must come to terms with his absence. But Zakir Bhai's passing simply emphasizes his permanence in our lives. We all need words to put greatness into context, don't we? Well, these are words that are steeped in expertise and experience, and we'll talk more about this today. But let me begin with asking both of you this question. Being a writer on the performing arts it usually takes shape in a very interesting combination of factors. You probably learn music, dance, or an art form as a child, or you're introduced to a genre in college and it never leaves you, or you attend concerts that you've lost count of, and you've read some great writing on art that has stayed with you again. So, which one of these factors was it for you? Hello. Hello. Should I do long press? Okay.
Yes, this is fine. So yeah, writing came way later. Writing was not in the picture to begin with. It was music, something that I grew up listening to from my parents. A lot of ghazals and classical music in my house. When and I didn't have to be dragged to learn it. I mean, I was very interested, except to learn it from my mom. You don't want to learn at home. So, and I think when I did train in Hindustani, but when I went to college, and of course my father's old tapes of the Beatles, and so got into a lot of Western music at that time, pop, jazz, yeah. So writing came much later. So it started with music. It started with that being the passion. If it was for my family, I would have become a musician. Journalism was not something. Journalism was something that I wanted to do because I liked literature. I liked reading, and
So,
that's
music's loss was journalism's gain.
well, thank you. That's very kind of you. But that's the combination that eventually happened. That I wanted to write, and when I walked into a newspaper office, you have to have some kind of expertise. I couldn't write on economics. I couldn't write on climate. I couldn't write on science. That's the one thread that bound me with writing, which could have bound me with writing, was music, and that's also where the lacuna was the time I came in, which is about 15 years ago. That's where the lacuna was. That's where writing was really suffering, especially in the classical music space, where the older writers were either retired, not writing. People like Mohan Nadkarni were not there. Shanta Sarabjit Singh, Sheila Dhar. These were people who were very actively involved with writing on music and dance at that time, and there was that space was wide empty. So when I walked into the Express, the beat was open. Outside of the Express, the world was open in terms of music. So that's where it kind of everything just came together like that.
That's lovely to know. Naresh, please.
On my brother's wall, there's a painting by a chap called Paul Fernandez of a scene that was very much like the scene in my grandparents' home. It shows a grandmother on the piano, a grandfather on the violin, an uncle on the guitar, everybody performing enthusiastically. And I like the painting mainly because sort of it has a line at the bottom that we've adopted as our family motto. It says, "There's no disease like Fernandez." So I had the fortune or misfortune of being in a family like this, where everybody was enthusiastic, sort of skilled performers, except for me. I took piano lessons for 5 years, and then the piano teacher begged my parents not to send me anymore because I was obviously without talent. And I landed, but I was very interested in music. I read a lot about it, and I listened a lot. I was, in the way that boys are, an enthusiastic record collector, sort of, it's now called crate digging. You go and you try to have everything that the Beatles ever recorded, including that album with Pete Sheridan or whatever. But I landed up at the Times of India, as all good reporters should, at the bottom of the barrel. I was a crime reporter. But the Times of India had a vibrant arts page run by a woman called Shanta Gokhale, who was in the middle of sort of assembling this galaxy of stars. And she was getting young people to write for her. And there were all kinds of things that were being put together. There was Ranjit Hoskote, who was writing about art, somewhat obscurely. One of my memories is my editor, Daryl De Monte, coming up to Shanta Gokhale and saying, "Shanta, what does this word mean?" And Shanta looked at him in her imperious way and said, "Daryl, everybody knows that's a shade of blue." And Daryl sort of retreated somewhat deflated and emerged 5 minutes later holding the dictionary and saying, "Shanta, it's a shade of green." But
Bravo, Daryl.
there was, at the NCPA, this caused great consternation, and they did an evening discussion at which young Hoskote had to defend himself. It was called The Art of Writing About Art. And Hoskote said that in order to understand the art review, first you had to, and in order to understand the art, first you had to understand the art review. Hoskote has since become one of the most lucid, explanatory art writers of our generation. There was also Arundhati Subramaniam, who was a poet. She was writing about dance. There was a chap called Himanshu Butte who was writing about architecture. And I once went for some jazz concert, as I would be, and was telling Shanta about it, and she said, "Write about it." And so I began to sort of tentatively try to find a way to write about these stories. I've always been interested, not so, I don't have the expertise to critique something, but I'm fascinated by the messages that music conveys and the forms that music takes. And I was especially interested in, sort of what people call fusion. But I realized that there is nothing like purity in music. Hindustani music, is so influenced by traditions from Persia, and more popular music, going in Bombay especially, for 150 years, has been influenced by the music of the world. And so that's what I was interested in. The writer, but also the composer, Viktan Paranjoti, spoke of the music of miscegenation. And I'm interested in that process of miscegenation, the energies that come from it, the new forms that it takes.
That truly reflects in the beautiful book I have right before me, from which I'm going to read a little later. But you painted this beautiful picture for us, Naresh, this lively newsroom atmosphere that Shanta Gokhale had gathered. But it does seem to be missing today in terms of what we read in the mainstream, English dailies of India. I can also vouch for the Hindi dailies, at least I can't vouch for all of the regional media. So you've been associated with the arts in various capacities, starting out at the Times of India, then as editor-in-chief, at Time Out Mumbai, that brilliant art and culture guide that really, it played a role in, if I may use a Gen Z term, in, creating FOMO for all those gigs and plays and concerts that it put out in those listicles, and if you ended up missing them. Then, of course, as author of Taj Mahal Foxtrot, this wonderful research on jazz, having found a home away from home halfway across the world, and the age of jazz in Bombay. And then, of course, as editor of Scroll, the digital daily, for close to 10 years now, which has at least 4 sections dedicated to the arts, literature, culture, music. So give us your perspective on the coverage of arts in India through your own career path.
So everybody talks about and this is the theme of this discussion, the sort of shrinking space for the arts. There's a shrinking space for all serious journalism, and I think we need to see this within the context of that. There's a serious shortage of space for serious reportage. And the arts are always, for some reason, the first thing to be dispensed with. So when I was at the Times of India, suddenly sort of this new ideology was sweeping through media, but it was a reflection of the ideology that was sweeping through India, of sort of neoliberalism. And they, sort of the owners of the Times of India decided that every page should pay for itself, that there should be enough sponsors or advertisements. And they decided that there was no audience or support for the arts page. And it is said, I'm not sure this is true, that they decided that they would do away with the arts page, and if they received a single letter of complaint, that they would restore it. And it is said that that letter never came. And I'm not, like I said, it may be an apocryphal story. Yeah, sort of. I returned to the arts after reporting on communal violence and many other things as the editor of Time Out. And I think the big change that had happened in this gap, which was about 10 years, was the amazing rise of the PR industry. And everything was being determined by public relations. I think Time Out was an interesting magazine in that it told you what was happening, but we gave you previews. And so there was not enough critical evaluation of many spheres of cultural activity. We reviewed the movies, but we couldn't review the music. And the preview was a sort of strange thing. We, especially for Indian classical music, for instance, we would say this is going to happen at a concert. And Shubha Mudgal, the classical vocalist, said, but we never know what we're going to sing at a concert. You know, sort of, we get there and then we decide. So it was a sort of unsatisfactory way of covering some bits of culture. At Scroll, our motto is that we bring you the news that matters and the things that make life worth living. And so we sort of decided that there had to be an equal emphasis on the arts because they make us happy. They give us pleasure, among other things, but they also reflect the changes in our society. And it's important, you know, sort of everything is interconnected. And so that's why we do what we do.
Well, may your tribe increase. So, Anshu, among other English dailies of India, the Hindu and the Indian Express definitely are those rare exceptions, you know, when it comes to covering the arts. But with health and tech jostling for space on the Sunday pages, is it difficult to get a pitch on the legacy of a Sarangi giant approved today?
Not today. I think there is enough street cred, proverbial street cred by now to do that. But at one point, absolutely, yes. You know, when you are 22 years old and you are going to pitch a cover story on classical music, no one wants it. You know, I remember this, you know, you spoke of the Ramnath Goenka Award. It went to a story which I was asked to put in 600 words or 800 words. But the question was, why now? What's the news peg? Why does anyone want to interview a woman called Annapurna Devi who does not want to talk to anyone and is sort of shut herself in an apartment in Bombay and isn't willing to talk? I mean, when I said that she will talk, you know, we'll figure out a way. They said, okay, write 800 words. You know, these are editorial people who've been in the business for 30 years. You're so young, you know, you're a trainee at that time. But I must also credit that once it came in, once it was written, instead of 800, about 3,000 words were written. It kind of shifted. It occurred to them that this deserved that sort of a space. It was a rare thing, and finally it did become the cover story for Sunday. And but that was the time. And for any young journalist walking in to pitch anything on the arts, it's going to be hard because they're going to be hard on you. With Naresh, has a background in the arts, so I think he'll be a kinder editor in that sense. Most newspapers, most dailies, be it Indian Express, Hindustan Times, Times of India, the main boss, the editor in chief, is always going to be a political editor, someone who's deep into that. But what I tried, and this is an attempt for all these years, that see, at the end of the day, the true job of a music critic is going to be to sort of pull a work apart, right? To sort of dive into the core that it has, and to figure out what it's saying for for the society and for us. This is how it is, right? I mean, if you're if the reporting on the world tells you about the world, the reporting on the arts is going to tell you about yourself. That's how. So it's going to be hard, but why not figure out the politics of that work? So that's what I try. I'm sure people in the past have also done that, but I think people were far more focused on the precision, on the technicality, which is great, which is also a very significant part of the art. But I think in the last 10-15 years, what I've seen more of is also this analysis of the of the politics of an art form. If there's a work of music, if a T.M. Krishna is not going to start the way a Carnatic concert is supposed to start, and probably start from the final piece of it, why is that change? If he's singing in if he's singing a Sufi hymn, with Carnatic music in the background, if he's getting a Dalit violinist to sit next to him and do something which hasn't been done in the past, there are a lot of meanings attached to this. Now it's just not music anymore. It's not only music. It is way beyond that. Right? I mean, if you're reporting on the December music season this time, it's very political. So I think that's where it kind of, music, something as simple as Diljit Dosanjh, a folk artist from Punjab who's become so big at this point. There was a time, in Punjab, when men, wearing turbans and with their beards, the first thing that they did when they went out of India was cut it all to look normal. What Diljit did for Sikh men was to be proud of who they were. So he walks on stage in that traditional attire and sings, and Sikh men are proud of their heritage suddenly. A pop artist can do that. That's political, that's interesting. So going beyond that song and dance, going beyond what, of course lyrics are important. Some musicians or some artists are going to say things through their lyrics, but a lot of them are going to do things differently. So to read between the lines, to find these interesting bits in stories, I think that nuance, I think that can change the game for days to come. So the shrinking space can be expanded, I think, if we look at it in a slightly different manner.
No, absolutely. I mean, arts don't exist in isolation, and if they are treated that way, then that becomes a massive problem. So you were talking about the precision of how those reviews used to be. It's for you, Naresh. So we've in the NCPA, at the NCPA, we have a huge reservoir of archives, and there I've come across press clippings after press clippings of reviews of Bharatanatyam recitals, of classical performances, and especially when I talk about the Times of India as well as the Indian Express, there was this idea of not giving the byline, and it used to be called our dance critic, our music critic, our correspondent, our theatre critic, and these were people who knew their arts. They knew their Adhus, they knew their Lalit and Malkons, they knew their Brecht and Badal Sarkar. So when that kind of nuance is missing today, Naresh, what do you think is the impact on the larger ecosystem of the arts and the conversation and the dialogue on the arts?
No, definitely, as you point out, leaves us so much the poorer. The sort of performers do not have the advantage of having perspectives on their work. And part of the PRization of the arts is that uh, artists themselves want to control the narrative. They don't want to hold themselves open often to critique of this sort. Everything needs to be positive. It's also that audiences are the poorer for it in their understanding of a form. Or even, I mean, sometimes I think when I was younger, I would read something and become curious about it and want to go if it ever happened again. I think we lose out on that, perhaps in mainstream journalism, but I think some of this now has found its way to very specialized blogs or the equivalent on the internet. So, these conversations proceed, but perhaps like everything else in a more fragmented way, where specialized audiences are having conversations with themselves.
Right, absolutely. Uh, do you find yourself to be in the minority within the fraternity today, Suanshu?
Absolutely. I was telling you earlier that a very senior colleague asked me for a writer, someone who could write on the subject. I don't know anyone. I wish there were more people. I've had very crazy incidents, like we were talking in the morning. From Hindustan Times, we at a Shahid Parvez concert, the education correspondent comes and has to write on what we call the high arts, so to say. So it's one's not asking for too much. I think I'm not saying that someone has to be deeply trained to be able to write, but at least some interest. You cannot send your education correspondent to cover Hindustani classical music. So that is an issue. But I'm also very hopeful. I'm also very hopeful in the sense that the younger people and the kind of musicians that one encounters today. I mean, I'm not one of those hopeless people who'll say, oh, Hindustani classical music is going to the dogs. It's not happening. No one is learning. No. I think the younger generation is very, very interested and far more deeply interested than sometimes probably than even we were, So I think I think it'll change. I do think it'll change, and I think giving space to the arts will help there. So let's not get rid of our books pages or our or our art sections or. Also another space to also find other ways to write. So for example, even with the Indian Express, COVID happened, so many things changed. The daily page that we have, which was the arts page, so to say, it was called Talk, we don't have it anymore. So what does the writer, I mean, we of course have the Sunday paper where we write, but what does a writer like me do if there is no space for review? So you find other sections. So we started exploring edit and opinion. We started writing these pieces. For example, the Diljit example I give you can easily be a part of any opinion page in any newspaper of the country. We also started a space, in the 5 Ws and 1 H, I think the why became very important suddenly, which is where explains came in. So suddenly we were explaining concepts, Suddenly we, we just don't want to talk of Zakir Hussain in the sense that he was a great performing artist, right? But we also want to talk about the history of the instrument, for example, that he's playing. People are talking about antiquity of, of instruments like sarod in India, which comes from rabab, which is not, which is not a very, very old instrument, so to say. But same for the tabla. It's not a very old instrument. The current tabla is actually just about 800 years old. So, in the current form and technique, I mean, of course, it comes from a different space. So to talk about these things, I think people are really interested. So to find avenues within that setup to look at things differently, why not write it like this?
So the onus also lies
on
with
us as well, to
how
change with the times.
How to change with the times, reinvent themselves. Your opinion piece on, So all of us, whether it was at on stage at the NCPA, whether it was at the Indian Express, whether it was at Scroll, I think we were all jolted into, oh, now we have to write this obituary. My God, it's, we didn't even find the time to come to terms with this news because we had to get on so clinically with it. And I think in one of your opinion pieces, which followed a couple of days after the news of Zakirji's passing, was on how the fraternity, you don't know how to mourn for the passing of an artist. You don't, nobody teaches you that. So that was a very poignant piece, and it would have resonated with a lot of us.
Yeah, how do you grieve an artist?
How do you
You know,
grieve an
how
artist?
what do you do?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, I'd like to bring up another example where we struggle with people, finding the right kind of writers for the kind of work we do at the National Center for the Performing Arts. I mean, I have a wonderful young artist with me here, a young writer with me here who contributes to the magazine, Aishwarya. We have Louis here, who's written beautiful articles, but they're all, again, people in the minority. We tend to have people at our press conferences who are parachute dropped, just like the journalist Suanshu was talking about a little earlier. And they have asked some rather uninspired questions, including one where we were asked if Schubert was going to perform at our season. So that has happened. But I have two wonderful people with me who do inspire hope, and I'm going to use this opportunity to pick their brains a little bit more about how they approach their writing. So Anshu, your journalistic repertoire, if I may call it, spans Hindustani classical, folk, Bharatanatyam, Kudiyattam, rap and rock, and Punjabi pop.
Half of it I didn't know. So it's
and an occasional side of Western classical music as well.
So it's
how do you prepare for it?
No, read. I mean, there is no other. See, as someone who trained as a Hindustani classical musician, can know music in a very wide sense of the word. I think I draw the line at metal. I don't. I mean, as much as I enjoy metal concerts, I don't think I'm adept at writing on them. So I wouldn't. But as far as other fields are concerned, I come from a Punjabi family, so Punjabi folk has been such a part of me. You also kind of listen to so much and kind of that kind of gets into you. But otherwise, I think for subjects that you don't know about, just read. A newspaper will not be able to afford more than one music writer. So you basically are that jack of all trades, wala. You will sort of have to read about everything. I remember speaking to Naresh when he had written the book. So as interested as I was in jazz, I went through his book to sort of understand what. So basically, do your homework, right? Research the person you're meeting, know everything about that person before you should know the answer to the question you're going to ask, so that you can ask a smarter follow-up question. You should be that prepared when you're meeting an artist, for that matter, or sort of. I'm not going to suggest reviewing performing arts without enough training, but as far as interviewing a performing artist is concerned, I think reading enough, understanding their work enough, can sort of allow you to do a good interview.
Naresh, I would love for you to speak a little bit about the kind of research that went into Taj Mahal Foxtrot. I think it's an extraordinary work, and it started with your own neighborhood, with realizing that somebody who lived down the lane was in fact a jazz legend, and that sort of was the beginning of this book. So if you could tell us a little bit about that.
So yeah, my weakness is that I like gossiping with old people, and sort of this essentially, as I've said, sort of grew out from that, chattering away, and sort of, I suppose, little bits of information, nuggets of information get stored in your brain, and suddenly you begin to see the patterns with this. So this actually started, as I've said, with entirely. I mean, the intention wasn't noble at all. I wanted to know about a relationship that had rocked the sort of Bombay Goan world in the 60s between a crooner and a trumpet player, who then went on to create some of the greatest pop, Konkani pop music. It's almost like they were at the forefront of inventing a new genre. And as I was sort of pursuing this salacious gossip, people would tell me about other things. And so Frank Fernand, who I decided to start with since I'm lazy, and he lived down the road, and I had no idea who he was, but he was the father of a friend. I went to speak to him, and he told me about this relationship. But then he told me about playing jazz in Bombay in the 1930s and these African Americans who had taught him. And it just grew from there. I was very fortunate. I mean, sort of the paradoxical thing about my book is that I wish I had understood the importance of some of these connections when the people I wanted to write about were still alive. And I didn't ask, I had interviewed many of them, but not in a very focused way. And it's only when I began to see the pattern, and by then they were all gone. But the internet is an astonishing thing. And as I began to research my book, more and more databases came online. I was really fortunate to have access to something called ProQuest, which has a section called Historical Newspapers. And so, for instance, I was interested in a chap called Teddy Weatherford, who was born in Virginia, played in Chicago with Louis Armstrong, went to Paris, came to Bombay, played in Calcutta, played in Shanghai. And this historical newspaper database has African American newspapers, it's got Chinese newspapers in English, it's got the Times of India, and you type in the word Teddy Weatherford, and his arc appears before you in the newspapers in a way that previous researchers would have had to go to each of these places to look for this stuff. So that was a great help. It also helped that digitization of music had got much more sophisticated when I began to do this. And so I knew that this chap, Teddy Weatherford, had recorded maybe about 70 sides. And there was no hope in hell of actually getting them because they were all on shellac, they'd never been digitized. But then there were collectors in Italy, in Germany, in Australia, and they didn't have to send me the record, they just made these copies and sent them to me. And so I was fortunate just to be the recipient of in the enormous generosity of people around the world. I started, there were lots of bits of information I got. There was lots of stories that couldn't go into the book because a book isn't linear. You have to have a few characters. So I decided I would put them up on a website, and I realized to my astonishment that there are old people around the world who are Googling the names of people they danced to in the 1940s, now spread out around. And so a woman called Maxine Steller, for instance, who began to become my pen pal when she was 84. She had grown up in Bombay. Her fiancé at that time was part of a band called the Broadway Boys. They were Anglo-Indians. They went off to Australia. And she began to send me all this astonishing, the sort of clips of the newspaper clips, but also photographs and corroborating information. People began, I once did a piece about a Parsi saxophonist called Rudy Cotton. And the comment section of my website, people would begin to write in and say, I saw him, these are my memories of him. Somebody popped up to say, my mummy said he was my daddy, but I've never met him.
On this note, I'd like to indulge myself a little bit and read from how Taj Mahal Foxtrot is so beautifully situated in the city. Taj Mahal Foxtrot is about a quest for freedom, both political and artistic. It celebrates conspicuous cosmopolitanism. It's about an attempt to create an Indian internationalism. It follows the circular movement of jazz from the ghettos of New Orleans to elite Bombay ballrooms and back again to the street as a pulsating element in Hindi film music. Taj Mahal Foxtrot is also an exploration of the spirit of passionate collaboration and clear-headed compromise that once flourished in my native city. A spirit that was embodied in the life and work of men like Frank Fernand, Chick Chocolate, Dave Carson, and Teddy Weatherford, who walked through these pages. For much of its history, Bombay, like the music I love, encouraged everyone to find their own voices within the loose confines of a stated theme. Contemporary Bombay, however, is not only doing its best to choke the spaces in which the quirky and the eccentric can survive, it has also lost its ability to agree on a central melody. Taj Mahal Foxtrot is a gentle plea for a new score. Beautiful, Naresh. So, Anshu, back to the newsroom. How do we all work to daily deadlines, and you mentioned yesterday this wonderful term called creativity on demand that newspapers ask of you. So, where do you find the time to indulge the soul, to indulge the soul, to feed the soul, and how do you balance the pull of the newsroom and the pull of the concert hall?
I listen to music to indulge the soul, but I write on a deadline to feed myself. You can't. That's butter for me, but you have to write for your bread. So it's not the easiest thing to do. It is, but one has to understand the larger context of it, which is that about 20 years ago, there were 2, 3, 4, 5 newsrooms competing with each other, 5 newspapers fighting to get the best thing out on the same thing. They were competing. At this point in time, there are so many people writing. There are things called, the people called influencers, the people called everyone is a writer, everyone is a reviewer, and that propels a lot of misinformation. There is a lot of misinterpretation because of that. And that has happened because the space is so democratized, which is also a good thing, right? So there is that flattening of the hierarchy, in that sense that no one is. But then speed matters at that point. If I am going to understand the virality of a concept, if there's something being talked about at that point, if I'm going to write about it 3 weeks later, it doesn't matter. It will matter to a certain extent. I'm not saying it's not going to matter at all, but giving it out at that time will be more significant. With such less attention spans at this time. I'm not saying change everything, but evolve a little. You cannot do without that. That is the only constant. You'll have to find that middle ground. I'm not saying submit your copy in 20 minutes, but do it in 4 hours. Don't sit on it for like a week or 2 weeks. And so that kind of delay kind of puts you out of circulation. So I'm a proponent of finding that middle ground, to sort of find your way in through that. Good writing will find its way through that. But we also have to, because we lived very differently earlier. A newspaper was going to bed at night. We had like good 12, 18 hours. If you'd seen the concert the previous night, you had a lot of time to write about it. Not anymore. Everything is over the internet. It's a speed fest. So I'm not saying let the quality suffer, but I'm also saying that do not laze around too much over it. You'll have a great piece of writing probably at the end of it, but will it matter then? I'm talking of a newspaper. Will it matter after 2 weeks as much?
Speed matters even more in the digital world. When news breaks and again I'm going back to, for example, the news break of Zakirji's passing. How do you go about commissioning stories? How do you figure out this is the person who's going to be best suited for something like this? Maybe I'm going to follow up with another piece written by someone else. How do you deal with the speed? And how do you deal with the gnatish attention spans of today and keeping things relevant for that?
So actually, I just read this book about Rudy von Leyden, who was the art critic for the Times of India in the 40s. And we're reminded that speed always matters, because he would go through Bombay looking at the art shows and then cycle back to the office so he could write out his art review, because of course all of Bombay wanted to read this damn art review the next day, you would imagine. So yeah, sort of speed has always been the curse of what we do, and it almost militates against meditative reflection on a piece of work. Yeah, sort of. I am in the situation like much independent media, and that we don't have money to commission pieces, so we depend on people saying we want to write for you. And so yeah, for Zakir, it's just I suppose we were lucky that somebody who had known Zakir for 50 years wrote in and said, "Can I write for you?" So I don't have to make decisions.
And digital publications also offer very specific insight in terms of click-through rates of articles, the kind of time you spend on reading an article. So, how do the arts and culture sections fare on those counts? And do you take that into account while drawing up your editorial plans, or it's despite that?
So it's flattering that you think we have an editorial plan. We sort of blunder along. But we have, everybody is looking at these analytics all the time. I don't. So when we started about 10 years ago, it was very cool for everybody to have a counter on the site saying sort of shared so many times or whatever. And we decided we were
Or
not
an
going to.
8-minute read.
Oh, yeah, whatever. And we decided that we just wanted our colleagues to write the best stories possible. That we were not going to put this pressure on them. And especially younger people want to know their analytics. And we don't let anybody see it. So, because we could put up a story on internet jokes and it would get a million reads, and somebody who slaved over a piece of reportage for weeks, it would be read less. And I'm broadly interested in how many people have read the site over the month and not specific pieces. But if you look at our trending bar, it is often the culture pieces that are up there. So sort of, it is clear that people will read interesting pieces if you try to, if you put them out there. They won't read them as much as perhaps a sports section, but people recognize interesting stories.
So, Suhanshu, the Indian Express has done some great innovation on digital and social media. I mean, they slice and dice stories and put them on a carousel post. You can understand what's happening in the world of TM Krishna and the million things he has to deal with through that carousel post. You can also look at Suvir Saran's musings on his favorite ragas in that kind of a post. So, where do you see, cultural journalism headed, especially in the print medium?
Everything that's going to print is online at this point. I think the only difference that they've understood is that it's probably a different audience. There are still people who like the tangible feeling of picking up a newspaper and reading it. But there are a lot of people who've now moved online for whom they have sort of catered a certain kind of content. I think they both will survive. I don't believe in this idea that print will die one day. Not anytime soon. I mean, it has, of course, abroad it's a very different thing, but in India, I think it's going to be around for a while. There are no. I feel print is stricter, when it comes to even a comma, or the way, or even though slants aren't really something that because we pretty much do the way, I mean, even culture reporting, I don't have to write it a certain way, to tilt a certain way, to sort of politically slant it a certain way. I don't have to, but print is far more stricter when it comes to writing a certain way. I think online, especially for a newspaper, I wouldn't speak of scroll here, but if for a newspaper, I think the rules are relatively easier as to what they put out and what they can or cannot put out. I mean, so there is that difference. Print remains, up there in terms of how it's putting out its content. Reportage, let's not say content.
Are we going to start fighting now?
No, I think Naresh is quite a stickler for the commas and the semicolons on scroll as well.
I'm specifically not talking of scroll really, but I do see a lot of.
It's a question of medium. It's a question of perhaps a public.
No, it's also a question of speed, right? You're not really 10 stories on the same topic. it's one person doing it. It has to be put out in half an hour. You're not going to have perfect.
That's not journalism.
But that is how it is right now.
I'm just being facetious. I know what you're saying.
It's an assembly line then.
It is. It has. In a lot of cases, you spoke of lifestyle, that journalism space. People are going to write about 5 Ayurvedic oils, that are going to help you and stuff like that. So that's not really journalism, right? So I'm not going to. So that's the kind of stuff that comes online all the time from various publications. So what's Deepika Padukone wearing? It used to be very fashion TV kind of stuff, which is now it's. And by the way, they fare really well in terms of numbers. The top story, either usually it's a crime story because people are really interested in violence, it seems. So crime stories go on top, or it's the film stories that are on top. But I reminds me of this very interesting incident. When Mohan Nadkarni used to write, and I think in one concert in one review he had criticized Vilayat Khan. Not criticize the entire thing, probably a couple of lines that Vilayat Khan disagreed with. So the next time another concert happened, and this is Bombay, Mohan Nadkarni is sitting in the front row, and Vilayat Khan Sahab is about to start. And before he starts, he takes the microphone and he says कि मोहन बाबू आज देखते हैं कि किस में ज़्यादा ताकत है, आपकी कलम में या मेरी मिज़राब में. So you see that relationship. You see that this thing of wanting to be reviewed, right? Or and these writers who are not really scared, big guy, So that power in journalism, so to culture journalism, at one point, which of course is lacking at this point. But of course, I think there is hope to do better.
There is a significant accent on film and web series reviews, and the best and the worst of classical and focal arts, don't tend to get critiqued at all. So we never know if they were good, if they were bad. They never know that. So, do you feel the onus also lies with the arts a little bit, the classical, especially in reinventing the repertoire, in keeping it current, trying to engage the audience a little more?
I think everyone needs to do it. I mean, there's no question about not evolving. See, if you are giving me that concert, for example, in dance, I mean, if you're presenting a Bharatnatyam concert, if you're presenting a Kathak concert for that matter, you're telling me about the stories of Radha Krishna, well and great, I'd love to see that. But go beyond that. Where is the context? Why not? We were talking about, I was on the jury of that Sunil Kothari Dance Prize, and I think one of the best dance performances that I found was by this Manipuri girl who spoke about home. The concept of Manipur at this point and the concept of home. She does this 5-minute performance. It's a little film that you have to create on last moments spent with her home before she has to leave it forever. Do you see how beautiful that is in the current? And she's doing traditional classical Manipuri while giving me this concept. Now that's what I want to really see more of. I don't want to keep seeing the same adavus from Bharatanatyam, the same things. That story. Give me Dikshita, give me Tyagara, but give me in a different context. Give me a bandish, but what are you trying to say with it? So it has to be. If it's traditional precision, great, but let's go beyond that a little as well.
I think Anish does this wonderful series on Scroll, the Listen series, and he does that. He brings the artist's perspective. He'll embed the relevant YouTube links as easy reference to what he's talking about. How did that series come about?
Because I bullied him into doing it. But Anish is one of our great tabla players, but he's also a great scholar. He's got a PhD on sort of how colonial Bombay they were great patrons of Hindustani music, and so Anish and I also share a great love for puns. So of course, when we started a publication, Anish was my first choice to ask him to write about music, and he does this. He really uses the medium to the potential of the medium to tell stories or sort of do music pieces in new ways. He points you to a clip which we can embed. And so the internet has really, again, helped arts journalism in all sorts of ways. It has helped you to see young people to see performances from around the world. And especially when you're researching something, you don't have to read about it anymore. You can experience it in some way. But yeah, so Anish has now been going, I think, for 10 and a half years, maybe 11, coming up to 11. So I think that is
For
the
as long as Scroll has been
as
around.
long as
also.
Scone has been around. So it is, I think, one of the longest running arts columns in India.
That's wonderful. So this really brings me to the last question. So there's always been this distinction between popular culture and the arts, and it's going to remain. So I mean, the audience for the former has always, outnumbered the audience for the latter. But with entertainment having become so personal, so palm-sized, what do you think the role of cultural journalism ought to be?
I think we saw it during the pandemic really well. In all of that science, numbers, vaccinations, I think what really came up was the arts when Yo-Yo Ma was sitting inside his home and playing his cello. Uh, you know, we sing and dance, about everything in this country. There are songs for births, songs for deaths, songs for weddings, everything. So when you were singing about the pandemic at that point, it felt that it wasn't insurmountable. It wasn't so surreal. It will get better. So I think the arts had a major role in sort of uplifting people at that point. Sitting in their homes. I don't know if vaccinations helped or not really. Now looking back, but I think I think the arts really did. So the role of culture is, as I said, to make us meet us, to sort of figure out what the society is going through. It is as simple as that. It's not about the taan or the riff or that beat, or that's there, but it's way beyond that.
Absolutely. Harish?
No, that's precisely it. I think as sort of media gets more fragmented, I think our role will be to help people see nuance, to sort of be even deeper, but also to find these new ways to tell stories using the potential of the internet. And yes, so there will be wider audiences, and there will be more young people who are interested and passionate in writing about certain things. So
Absolutely. So I'm going to end this discussion on a quote that I live by every day, and then we'll open up for the audience to ask questions if they have any. So this is philosopher C.E.M. Joad, and he was quoted in an all-important speech being made at the NCPA when one of our earliest theaters opened. And he was quoted, "Good taste is not instinctive but acquired. It grows slowly through the effort to understand what is beyond us, the endeavor to appreciate what we cannot yet understand. It depends on our willingness to be bored with what is good in order that we may become bored with what is bad and so demand something better." All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. If you have any questions for our panelists. All right. Thank you. 3 o'clock. Let's get going for other sessions. Thank you.